Everyone. I'm going to be speaking to you today about the transit, the ingress of Chiron into Taurus, which it's going to be doing on the 19th of June, and it will stay there until the 17th of September. So this is just going to give us a glimpse of how Chiron is going to operate in that sign of Taurus. It then, on the 17th of September, backtracks into Aries, and then it moves direct again in April, re-enters Taurus and stays in Taurus till 2033. So this ingress is a big deal. We've got some very big astrology, as you know, in June and July. And Chiron has about a 51-year orbit. And so it orbits between Saturn and Uranus. And that's very interesting in itself, in that Saturn represents the more conventional, physical, 3D world, the tangible world, whereas Uranus is going beyond that. The foreigner, the maverick, the one who doesn't fit. And that very much is the nature of Chiron, particularly the maverick, I would say. And we'll explore that a little further in a moment. So if you're born between 1976 and 1984, you will be going through your Chiron return, because round about, as I say, every 51 years, between about the ages of 50 and 52, you have what is called your Chiron return. And what that means is that everyone has Chiron somewhere. They have it in a sign somewhere in the chart. And this represents your original wound. And so, of course, we have many opportunities through our lives to heal that original wound, but you get a particularly large opportunity round about that time, 50 to 52. And often that original wound is triggered by circumstances, relationships, whatever, in order that you can fully heal it. And for instance, Chiron since 2018 has been in the sign of Aries. And Aries, as I've often said, Chiron in Aries, because Aries, the key words are I am. And therefore, if you're wounded in the I am-ness, if you like, the theme is so often, do I have a right to exist? From very early days, very early childhood, for whatever reason, there might have been a question mark around that, and that might have put you more into victimhood in some way, but always remember, wherever your Chiron position is, you are meant to turn that wound into leadership, and I'll give you a couple of examples later on. But particularly because Chiron has been in Aries since 2018, the recent years, and I'd say particularly from 2020, which I think we're all very aware of, is there's been a big issue around, are we in victimhood and deferring to the external, or are we standing in our sovereignty? I think that's circumstances have made that very clear. So how strong has been our sense of inner power as we've moved through the last a few years? So that issue is really being very activated with Chiron moving in Aries. And also what's reinforced that over the last 18 months is the nodal axis moving in Pisces and Virgo, because Pisces and Virgo can in its shadow expression, become the victim, defer to the external, the guru, the spiritual leader, etc. But now Chiron is beginning to move into Taurus. And if you're born with Chiron in Taurus, it's likely that in some way your earliest safety and security needs were not met for whatever reason. Remember, our souls always choose our birth chart. So this isn't jolly bad luck. It's what your soul chose for your soul growth in this lifetime. And everybody, as I say, has got it somewhere. So there was probably some issue around your earliest safety and security needs not being met. And that may have driven a kind of survival mentality where material possessions, because the keywords for Taurus are I possess, material possessions, it could be money, it could be tangible things, precious metals, very much associated with Taurus, jewelry, that kind of thing, could have been a compensation or a replacement for any lack of feelings of inner safety and security. You need to feel solid, as it were. And if that solidity didn't come in emotionally in childhood, in your early days, you have to compensate for it as you go through your life in some way. So that's the issue around Chiron in Taurus. There are many other issues which I'm going to come on to, because in a way this is a sense of material things versus the natural world as well. So this transit of Chiron, even though it's only for 3 months, from 19th of June to the 17th of September, so we're just going to get a glimpse of how Chiron in Taurus is going to operate much more fully from April 27 until 2033. But it will be a kind of rehearsal time for us, if you like, with this particular transit. And it will get us in touch with our own deeper sense of power. That's what it's meant to do. And so big issues that come up are around our physical body and the earth, and the health of our physical body and the earth, where they are wounded. Remember, Chiron's a principle of wounding, and therefore there will be a greater recognition that both our physical bodies very often, but very much the earth and nature, need healing. Big, big themes around Chiron in Taurus. You know, we have pillaged and raped the earth in many ways. And so we are going to turn our attention much more to the earth and nature, and how we can work in harmony and balance with nature, as they did in Lemurian times very much, where we feel that everything is in harmony. We are interconnected and interdependent with all other living beings. It's that kind of a feeling that Chiron in Taurus is going to contribute to building. Taurus is also about building. So it's going to initiate a deeper conversation with nature and the earth for sure. Taurus gives us a real gift, and to some extent an antidote to Uranus in Gemini, because Uranus in Gemini is going to speed up the mind, super speedy, things happening very quickly, mental overload, get very jazzed up, lot of input, a lot of news, a lot of information coming in, and we hop from one thing to the other. That's very Geminian. Taurus energy really wants us to slow right down. Back against a tree, bare feet on the earth, listen to the birds, stare at the sky. That deep, slow connecting to the natural rhythms of the earth is very Taurian. So Chiron in Taurus will help to reconnect us to that. You know, the feeling of the breeze on your face, the colors, the scents, the smells, the beauty of nature, and an increasingly awareness of what is sustainable and in balance with the earth and what is not. Where are we pillaging and exploiting? So themes that are going to come up strongly for these 3 months, and then much more from April next year, are around self-worth, our values, what is truly valuable. Is it material things? Is it the earth and nature? Natural resources, food production, global supply systems, also the global versus the local. Global supply systems to some extent are being disrupted right now, as we're very aware. Pluto in Aquarius, and remember, as soon as Chiron enters Taurus, it will square Pluto in Aquarius. I covered that in my update on the big picture video, and I'll put the link for that video below, because I covered a lot of that square aspect between Chiron and Pluto that will add to what I'm saying here today. But Aquarius links to local networks, local communities. So disruptions in global distribution of anything will ultimately take us back to local. Growing local food, getting in groups of friends, permaculture, shopping at local farmers markets, getting to know your local farmers, pulling back from centralized systems whenever you can. And Chiron in Taurus will very much be helpful to us in that respect. And so will Pluto in Aquarius, and they're in aspect to each other. Pluto is also, Taurus is also linked to money, banking, wealth, currencies, financial security in general. Now, I do think we will go through some big financial changes this year. Yes, I do. I don't know what form they will take. Astrology never knows the actual events and the details. But yes, I do think there are going to be some very big changes in the financial system. And in the past, yes, Chiron in Taurus has been linked to a kind of pivot point, both in economic and kind of ecological big events. I mean, we had the 1929 crash while Chiron was in Taurus previously from 1926 to 1934. But just before that, we also had the Roaring Twenties up until the crash. Also remember then that Neptune was in Leo then. It was in Leo in a fire sign. Remember, whenever Neptune's in a fire sign, it tends to add to inflation. And also, by the way, Neptune was also in Sagittarius from 1979 to 1980, another fire sign. And Chiron was in Taurus also, as I said earlier, 1976 to 1984. So again, there was an overlap. That was the oil crisis, the first oil crisis. And so Chiron and Taurus could also feed the Neptune in a fire sign of increasing inflation. That could be part of the picture too. But what I think, I'm not necessarily seeing, an absolute economic catastrophe. But what I do think is likely, particularly with Jupiter moving into Leo on the 30th of June, I'll talk about that in the next update video, opposing Pluto, is there will be greater awareness of the rich and the poor. That is pretty obvious now. That increasing concentration of wealth at the top end and increasing poverty at the bottom end. Because that exaggerated disparity of wealth will also feed what I've talked about so often recently, the more rebellious or revolutionary aspect in society, the kind of social unrest coming in very strongly this year, which is all part of this picture. Not a surprise, all part of the astrological picture. So we will have this greater sense of connecting to all other beings. And that's part of also, that's linking in with our increased psychic sensitivity. So we may start seeing or communicating with the elemental beings, the fairies, the elves, the tree beings, the inner earth beings. And in my two recent conversations with both Lee Harris and David Clements that are on my channel, you can easily find them, they both spoke about the inner earth beings potentially being the first beings, the first galactic beings that we are likely to come into contact with. And that's going to start to happen this year, I think, for sure, whether that's just in dreams or meditations or in a bigger physical way. For some people, the inner earth beings are going to be part of that. And Chiron in Taurus is part of that. Taurus is the earth, and Chiron is the maverick, the unusual one, the different one. And it's very interesting because I've noticed that when people have important Chiron transits, they may go through an experience of being made to feel like the outsider. You know, I've known several people who were just fired from a very conventional company, and they were fired because they didn't fit. They were the outsider, but there was then kind of official recognition of that. And often there was a sense of, gosh, that's just not fair. You know, so much injustice. But if you're not acknowledging that in an inner sense, the outer world will reflect that to you to make it very clear that your path is different, your path is alternative. And the one who doesn't fit comes from the orbit of Chiron going beyond Saturn, the 3D, the conventional, towards the alternative, Uranus. And also, by the way, at the moment, in terms of zodiac signs, Chiron is moving towards Uranus, away from Saturn currently. I mean, ultimately, Saturn will catch up, but Saturn is in Aries, Uranus is in Gemini. So Chiron moving into Taurus is moving further towards Uranus. And that's important too in terms of how Chiron is going to express. More galactically, more alternatively. Also, I think we are going to be seeing some amazing new healing modalities, because we will be working, our focus will be very much on healing the earth and healing our bodies. So there will be new healing modalities, and also the remembrance of ancient healing modalities. They will be coming back online. We are going to remember. I find it fascinating as well that, excuse me, as soon as Chiron enters Taurus, it will immediately not only be squaring Pluto, but opposing Haumea, the dwarf planet Haumea. Haumea is at 2-3 degrees of Scorpio. And remember that Haumea also had magical qualities to heal the land. Remember, she had a magic stick called the Macalai, and in working with her magic stick, she could heal the land, even if it had been laced through very poor agricultural practices. She could summon food from the land. She could summon wild seafood with her magic stick, the Macalai. So she had a shamanic ability. And Chiron, I don't know how many of you are aware, is also very linked to shamanism, which is fascinating. But just before we leave the Haumea piece, I think all of this new healing that will come in while Chiron is in Taurus. And remember, Haumea will be, they'll be in that opposition for quite some time, certainly the next 2 to 3 years. Remember that Haumea is also linked to greater longevity, living much longer once we are regenerated. She's a fabulous principle of regeneration, very much linked to New Earth. Not only is the Earth going to be regenerated, but so are we as physical bodies. And so that's a very powerful opposition. It's a very powerful T-square, actually, transformation, regeneration. So we will be given the challenge of shedding the synthetic, the artificial, the inorganic. That will be the choice, which I covered in the update on the big picture, and moving towards the natural and the organic and bringing that back into balance. There's been a meme circulating on social media. I won't get the words exactly, but it's something like, all the AI data centers in the world don't matter when there are no longer any bees, because the bees are crucial pollinators for our food, of course. So that's very clear. Chiron in Taurus in square to Pluto in Aquarius, I think. Now, what you may not know is that, well, firstly, I'd like to say Chiron was discovered in 1977, and that was really the beginning or the resurgence, the remembrance of many alternative healing modalities. Reiki and, herbalism came back in a bigger way, homeopathy. Chiron, you may know the myth of the wounded healer. Chiron was injured by a poisoned arrow, and he couldn't heal himself, but he learned many alternative healing modalities in order to heal others. So he became a master teacher, he became an astrologer, a herbalist, a homeopath, all of these alternative healing modalities, including astrology, as I say, and helped to heal many, many people. So although he couldn't heal his original wound, he helped to heal many others. And that was, very much 1977 onwards, we saw a lot of healing modalities come online. So Chiron is associated with 3 archetypes. The first is the wounded healer, which I've just described, really. In living with the wound and helping to heal other people, sacred knowledge is gained. So that's the first archetype. Sacred knowledge is gained. The second archetype that Chiron is linked to is the shaman, interestingly. And I've always felt, even before I started my training, that Chiron had a very shamanic essence about it. And the shamans are intermediaries between the physical and the spiritual realms. Remember, it goes beyond Saturn in its orbit, beyond the physical. And as my wonderful shamanic teacher, Sarita Sol, explained at the beginning of very, very first few minutes of our training, she said, shamans live both in ordinary and a non-ordinary reality. They can see in the dark. They're magical. So this is very much linked to Chiron. And then the third archetype linked to Chiron is the alchemist. And the alchemist is how you can turn that original wound into a gift, which is what we're meant to do. That's the whole purpose of it being in our charts, for soul growth, to turn the wound into a gift. And as I say, I think the big gift here will be loving the earth, loving nature, loving all of our creatures, and loving ourselves and the earth back into health and balance. So because Taurus is also linked to food and food production, agriculture, that kind of thing, I believe that Chiron moving into Taurus will bring that into high relief, food production. I've often mentioned that in videos over the last couple of years, as you well know, constantly referring to get a sprouter, get in touch with your local farmers. But I do think it will change how we grow food. We'll shift from global, centralized, to local, decentralized, getting to know your neighbors, your local farmers, as I say, big, big deal. The kind of food we eat, how much food we eat, I think that will all change as well, because we'll become aware that, and this is, over many years, that we need less food because we can live on the light in a bigger way. But that, that's not going to happen this year. It's going to take a long time. So where you have your natal Chiron is potentially the gift, and you are meant to turn it into leadership. And one obvious example, and I've often quoted this example because it's so clear, was Gandhi. Gandhi has his Chiron at 1 degree of Aries on the world axis. Couldn't be clearer. So this little Indian man led this incredible peaceful evolution or revolution against the great British Empire. He became a great leader. Martin Luther King had his Chiron in Taurus. And you can imagine being born as a black man in America, how he would feel that his earliest safety and security needs weren't met. But again, he turned it into leadership. That wonderful I Have a Dream speech, beautiful. And so you've really just got to look, and you can easily find these very simple words, keywords online. Search for the keywords for each sign. So Aries is I am, Taurus is I possess, Gemini is I think, etc., etc. So find out where your original wound is that you are meant through your life to turn into a gift and turn into leadership. So exploring Chiron, particularly as it's going to be moving through Taurus to give us this rehearsal time of the next 3 months, will enable us to live more deeply, to have a deeper conversation with our physical bodies. Talk to your body, talk to your organs. Many of you have never done that. Talk to nature, talk to the trees, talk to the birds, talk to the elves, talk to the inner earth beings, and to move beyond victimhood and suffering, which I'd say is virtually universal, whether you had Chiron in Aries or not. The last few years of Chiron moving through Aries have been really tough, have been really, really tough for many, many people. But this transit through of Chiron through Taurus gives us the promise of magical empowerment to become the shaman and to become the alchemist. So I hope that's helped you. I just wanted to do a separate video for this transit because there's so much astrology coming up in June and July. I wanted to break it down a little. So God bless. I'll be back very soon again next week with another video. Bye for now.